Hello and welcome. In this video, we're going to go through the process of adding a new drawer slide to the component cabinet library. The new hardware that we add will not only come through on hardware takeoff reports, but will also allow you to set the correct drilling pattern for each length of a slide. Once the hardware is added, you'll be able to select the new drawer slide from a drop-down menu in the prompts interface of each cabinet and in the project setup wizard. There are only two steps required to add a new drawer slide to your library. First, we need to create a lookup table that stores the lengths of the slides, the drilling locations, and the hardware names. Second, you need to add a row to the system drawer slide table and enter in the correct parameters into each column. There is an optional third step where you can add 3D and 2D drawings for visual representation, but this is not required if you only need machining and reporting information. Now that we understand what we're going to be doing, let's go through the process. Alright, so here I have Toolbox open, and I currently don't have an active project open. And that's what I want because I want to be working within the template. So here if we go to the Toolbox Setup menu and access the library specification groups, let's go and first take a look at the information that we're going to be adding. So here if we open up the global variable file, and from here we're going to go to View and Show Lookup Tables. Now down at the bottom of this interface, this shows us all of the lookup tables that we currently have in our global variable file. And you'll notice that all of these lookup tables that start with DRW slide and then the name of the slide, these are all of the different slides that are available with the specific information for each slide. And so if we take a look at the slide Bloom 230, we can see that each one of these rows corresponds to a slide. And so here in column 1, we have the length of the slide, and then here, columns 2 through 6, we have the hole locations that are going to be drilled for each of those slides. In column 7, this is going to be the hardware name that shows up on the reports, and then column 8 is the last hole in the drilling pattern, and this is specifically used for rollouts. And so for this first step, we need to create our own table that has the lengths of the slides that we're going to be using, the drilling information, hardware name, and then where the rear hole is located. And rather than using the buttons here at the bottom to create new tables and add rows, I'm going to do this within the spreadsheet because it is much more efficient. So here, if we close out of this interface and cancel out of this, here in the top left-hand corner, we can open up Workbook Designer. So this opens up all of the different workbooks that are used in our specification groups. And the G represents the global variable file that we were just looking at. So let's go ahead and open up that by double-clicking the header. And now we want to see one of the defined ranges for one of the slides that we were looking at. So here, if we use this drop-down menu, this shows us all of the different defined names. And rather than searching through this list here, I'm going to go ahead and hit delete a couple of times and clear the search. And here I'm going to type in lookup table. And then when I type D, you can see that it starts filtering out all of the different lookup tables that start with what I have typed here. And so here I'm going to go and open up the drawer slide Bloom 230. And once I click on that, that brings me right to that defined range. And so here we can see that it has highlighted that entire table. And this is the same exact information that we were looking at within the interface. And so here for the new table that I'm going to create, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy, starting from the header here, I'm going to go ahead and copy, and for my slide, I'm only going to be adding 4 available slides. And so including the first one, which is 0, which ensures that if the depth of the available space goes below the smallest slide, then it won't try to put a slide in there. So we're going to go ahead and copy from this down to this row, and then we'll just go ahead and go all the way over to the end here. And with that highlighted, we'll go ahead and right click, select copy. And with that copy to my clipboard, I'm going to go ahead and scroll all the way down to the very bottom of the spreadsheet past all of the lookup tables. And here we're going to go ahead and leave one blank row. I'm going to put my cursor right here, right click, select paste. And so now I have a new lookup table created. And so now I'm going to go ahead and type in the information that I want. So first in this header, I'm going to go ahead and just call this Andrew's slide. And so again, here with the first column, these are going to be the different lengths of the slides. And if we click on this, you'll notice in the formula bar, it has a formula. And this is just used to convert a metric value to an imperial value, since I'm using an imperial library. So you can see it's taking 250 millimeters and dividing that by the unit divisor, which in this case is going to be 25.4, to convert that to an imperial number. And then we're taking that number and then we're rounding it using this round function by our accuracy setting, which in this case is going to be 4 decimal places. So one thing to keep in mind, so if you want to just type in the value that you have in millimeters, just go ahead and replace this information. So let's say the first slide is 200 millimeters. We can type that in. If we don't want to deal with any of these formulas here, we could also just type in a hard value. So if we just type in 12, that's going to be the length of our next slide. Maybe we'll do 13 and 16. So it's very easy to set the lengths of your slides. Now here, these are going to be the hole locations from the front of the drawer box. And so in this case, here the first hole is placed at 37 millimeters. Again, we can just type in a different value. Maybe it's 38 for this particular slide. And we would just go through all of these values and enter in the correct information. So here for this first slide, you'll notice that there's only 2 holes drilled for this particular slide. And then here for the 3rd, 4th, and 5th holes, we just left those values blank. And then here for the second slide, that is 12 inches, we have 3 holes that are being drilled with the 4th and the 5th blank. And so after we've typed in all of our information here for our hole locations for our slide drilling, here we can also type in a name of the hardware that we want to be called out on our reports. And so here I'm just going to keep this simple. We're just going to call this Andrew's slide, and we'll call this 1.8. So there we typed in the name of our hardware that's going to be called out on our reports. And then here in the 8th column, we just want to verify that this number accurately represents the final drilling placement for our slide holes. And so you can see here that 9 inches is correct for this one. And then for our 12 and 13 inch slide, that is the last placement. And then here for our very final slide, that is the last placement. And so now that we have all of the information entered in correctly for our new lookup table, the last thing that we need to do is define this new lookup table so we can reference it in formulas. And so here, if we highlight the entire range, and this is going to be everything excluding the headers, we just want to highlight the data within this table, and then we'll right click on define a range, and then here in the name, we want it to start with lookup table. And then just to follow convention, we're going to go DRW slide, and then the name of the slide that we want to call this. So in this case, it's going to be Andrew's slide. So you're essentially just typing in this exact information and then whatever you want to reference or whatever you want to use to reference this table in your formulas. And so with that done, we'll go ahead and leave the rest and click OK. And you'll notice if you've done it correctly here, up in our define names list, we'll now have a new lookup table. And here, if we click away from our range, you'll see that it'll just reference whatever cell we have clicked on. But once we highlight the range, it's going to then refer to the lookup table, drawer slide, Andrew's slide. So that's a good way that we can verify that we've defined the information and everything's looking good. So with that done, we're going to go ahead and close out of this. It says we've made modifications to our global variable, so we'll click yes to save the changes. And here we can verify that this has worked. If we go into our global variable file now, go to view and show lookup tables, we should see a new table in here, and you can see the lookup table, drawer slide, Andrew's slide. So we click on that, and there it has all of the information that we've just entered in. So there we've finished with the first step. Now the next thing that we need to do is add a new row into the master list of all of the slides that are available. And so here, if we open this up and look for the lookup table system drawer slide, which will be towards the bottom, here if we open up this lookup table, this shows us the list of all of the available selections that we have within the prompts interface and within the project setup wizard. And this calculates all of the information for the slide. You can see that if we scroll over here, all of the different columns specify something different. So the second parameter is the slide height from the drawer bottom. And we'll have a document that goes over in depth what each of these columns do. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and insert in a row to add in the slide that I'm working on here. So I'm going to go ahead and select on this row 12 here. I typically like to add these in alphabetical order, or at least in the order that I want to see them when I use the drop-down menu, because it basically just takes this entire list and converts it to a combo box where you can select one of the slides from your library. And so since the name that I'm going to be adding is Andrew Slide, I'll just go ahead and add it right above this Bloom 230. And here we'll just go ahead and click this Insert Row button. That'll add in a row right above that. And again, rather than typing in the information within this interface, I'm going to go into the spreadsheet. That way I can copy and paste a lot of the information much quicker. And so we'll just close out of this. We'll click OK just to make sure that it saves that information that we added that row. And then we'll go back into the Workbook Designer interface. Open up the global variables. Again, use this drop down. Here I'll hit delete to clear out my current selection and type in lookup table system drawer slide. And here I'll use my arrow keys to arrow down to the table that I want to view. Hit enter. And here we have the same information that we were just looking at, but in the spreadsheet. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy one of these rows here and just paste it. So I'll copy all the information from the Bloom 230, and we'll just copy all of that information here, and then I'm just using Control C to copy and then Control V to paste all of that same data back in there. And here for the first column, this is going to be the name that we want to select from the drop-down. So in this case, we'll go and call it Andrew Slide. And now I'm going to hit Tab, and I'm going to enter in all of the correct information. Now the majority of the values that we're typing in here are going to be formula driven, and it's not a formula that we need to modify other than just making sure that it references the new lookup table. But there are a few parameters that we want to make sure that we get correct based on what the manufacturer requires for that hardware. And so here in the second column, the slide height from the drawer bottom, again, this here is going to be a millimeter value that is then being divided by 25.4, or the metric conversion. And so here, if there was something different, we can again type in a different millimeter value or just override that entire formula with whatever hard lock value in Imperial. But we'll go and change that to 16 for now. Now the slide clearance is going to be the amount that is deducted from the width of the drawer box in order for the slides to be attached correctly. And you'll notice here, this one is actually using the unit factor. And so in this case, it's kind of doing the opposite of the other formulas that we were working to, where this was looking for a millimeter value and then dividing that by 25.4. Here, when you see unit factor, it's looking for an imperial value. So just keep in mind here, we can adjust this to be 1.25 if we wanted to. And then here we're just going to keep going through all of these columns here. Now read the documentation as far as what each of these columns are meant to calculate, but for the most part you can leave in, if you'll see a formula in here, you can pretty much leave that in. Some slides require specific values, so the bottom gap at the bottom drawer, so the drawer that's on the bottom of the cabinet, it may require more of a clearance rather than what we have in the default global variable. So you have that ability to override that, but for the most part, a lot of the slides you'll be able to keep the default value that we have. Now as you go through these, you'll run across these formulas that use a VLOOKUP, and this is looking up some value, in this case the maximum drawer that can be evaluated for the cabinet that's currently being calculated, and then looking up the table that stores all of the different lengths of those slides. And so you'll notice that here this is currently looking to the Bloom 230 table, but we want all of these to reference the table that we created. And so in this instance, it's going to be Andrew's slide. And then here, if we hit tab, we'll want to make sure that we don't see a name error. That just means that we either didn't define the name correctly or we typed it in incorrectly. And here, as we go through these, some of these formulas will look a little bit more complex, but again, we're not changing anything about the logic of the formula. All we're doing is just pointing the name to the table that we created. So we'll type Andrew's slide again and just keep going through each of these columns. Now, rather than typing each of these out, I'm going to go ahead and do this really quick. All right, so there I've corrected all of the formulas to reference the correct lookup table that we created. Now, the last two columns I want to point out here are going to be where we would store any 3D or 2D graphics that we've either created or downloaded from the manufacturer. And so here, this is the path from the graphics folder to where that's located. And if you're unfamiliar with where the graphics folder is, I'll go ahead and show you that in just a minute, but keep in mind that it's going to be basically in the graphics folder and then in the subdirectory hardware and then in the subdirectory wood drawer slides. That's going to be where the 3D block is located, and then here this is going to be where the 2D block is located for any section information or any section drawings that you want to place that on. So with that done, and with all of our information correctly entered into this table, we're going to go ahead and just close out of this. Again, save our global variable file, and let's go ahead and test this out. So here, we'll go ahead and close our template, and let's go ahead and create a new project. So first of all, here, if we go into the project wizard and go to the hardware and look at the drawers, let's go ahead and switch to the standard wood box, and then in our slide selection we can see here that we now have a new drawer slide that we can select. And so we'll just click on Andrew's slide to set that as our default for this project and save and close. And again, yes, we'll save those changes. Here we'll go and create a new room. And now we'll go ahead and draw one of our cabinets here. So we'll go ahead and open up our drawer bank cabinet, and we'll draw a 3-drawer base for now. And again, here we can verify if we go to the drawer box options, we can see that the same settings are still applied. It's using our new slide that we've entered in there, and we'll go and click OK. All right, and so here we can see that it's not showing a block of the hardware, but we are getting our correct drilling pattern for our drawer slide. And here if we go into the edit design data, and I'll select on this drawer just so we can get directly to that. So here if we go to our hardware parts, we can see that it is calling out Andrew slide 16 pair, and that's the information that we entered into our lookup table. So now we're going to get the correct machining, and the information is going to come out correct on our hardware takeoff. Now the last thing that I want to show you is where the graphics, if we did have 3D hardware that we wanted to display within the drawing, here if we go to Toolbox Setup, or actually Help, I'm sorry, and browse to factory data, that's going to open up Windows Explorer with our current configuration active. And then here if we go into graphics, and we'll remember that it was in the subdirectory hardware and then wood drawer slides. And so this is where we would copy the DWG drawing of our hardware. And it also might be good to open up one of these existing hardware files to make sure that the drawing that you have is rotated and positioned at the origin of the drawing as well. But that's everything that we need to do in order to add a new hardware to our library. I'd like to thank you for watching, and hopefully you learned something.